Happy 2025, everyone. This is my first little story of 2025. Here we go. It's called Do I Love Complaining? This hurts. This is boring. Can't we just learn a drop? I think a lot of movement teachers have a fraught relationship with students who are complaining, especially youth students, but also parents and adults. I know that I have very little tolerance for students complaining or being down on themselves. But my partner loves complaining. He complains without hesitation and with great gusto. Of course, he wouldn't call it that. He would call it making observations about his own discomfort. I have a knee-jerk condescension towards his complaints sometimes. I'm not proud of it, but in my early life in martial arts, complaining was one of the cardinal sins, and so I learned pretty quickly to keep my mouth shut about my unpleasant experiences. In defense of my knee-jerk reaction, my partner is really only comfortable at exactly 72 degrees. And so when he is not the right temperature, I am sure to hear one of his observations. In his world, it's so cold today, the handsome man observes as he steps outside and shivered. But in my world, it's so cold today, the handsome man whines, performatively clinging to himself. There is just something about complaints that bring out my least charitable self. God forbid I afford myself the pleasure of complaining about anything. I'm not anti-pleasure. I am a person who gives myself a little treat for basically every household chore I ever do, but somehow complaining is different. Here is my definition for clarity. A complaint is when you talk about something that is wrong or uncomfortable in a bid for sympathy from other people, but without presenting any plan to fix it, or looking for affirmation that your situation is basically totally intractable. The universe has conspired against you specifically to cause you discomfort or pain in some sort of unsolvable way. Or a time when the bid for sympathy overrides your desire to seek a solution for your problem. Like any good millennial, I recognize that my reaction here is kind of disproportionate. It's disproportionate in a way that says more about me than anything else. I get that. My strong opinion on this topic is mostly my own problem. Because there is obviously something going on here that is not just about complaining. For example, one criteria for complaint is that no solution is presented. But one thing I've learned from my partner is that sometimes complaining is a solution in itself. My thinking self finds this idea totally reasonable, but my feeling self rejects the idea that complaining can ever be a solution to anything. My feeling self is very sure that complaining is just an anti-solution. My own chronic pain has been a great teacher about this. I had a really bad fall in my 20s, and I have days where my back and my leg hurt so much that it interrupts my sentences. It is distracting and overwhelming. It leads me into big thoughts and makes me feel this sense of impending doom for the whole world. It lowers the threshold for drama in my relationships with other people. Writing an email becomes a huge burden. The entire world feels like it's somehow depending on me for something, and I just can't quite remember what it is. And while I do have some solutions to reduce my pain, they all take time to work. There is no instant or quick fix on a pain day. On a pain day, every fiber of my being tells me to stay quiet about the pain, to not complain. There is nothing to be done, no solution to be had, and so suffering in silence is the kindest thing to do for the people around me. Suffering in silence feels so smugly satisfying. It's inner proof that I am stronger, cooler, essentially better than anyone who would complain about this. The problem is that is kind of just wrong and bad. The habit of suffering in silence is comfortable and smug, but if I actually scratch the surface of that comfort and smugness, it's kind of an ugly way to relate to the world. On a little tangent that'll come back around, there is something compelling about the idea that Christianity, with its emphasis on the holiness of martyrdom, is the water that my smugness is kind of floating in. Christianity was so present in the culture I grew up in, and in Christianity, martyrdom is like the greatest love and greatest gift and greatest accomplishment of the literal Son of God. It's also lurking under the surface of a lot of our media, like in Marvel when Iron Man makes his big sacrifice, or in The Dark Knight when Batman is willing to be the hero we need. When people say, my cross to bear, they don't mean I'm going to complain about this now. They mean I'm going to save the world by silently, beatifically accepting this pain. To be honest, I don't think Buddha does much better. Life is suffering, and let go of your attachments doesn't have the ring of, let's complain about this. It has the ring of, enlightened people don't really complain because they're too busy being enlightened and stuff. I think my feelings of smugness here are really well earned when I suffer silently. I am bearing my pain stoically, hoarding it to myself in a way that is, if not Christ-like, certainly at least enlightened. Basically, if I don't complain, I might as well be Jesus or Iron Man or Batman or Kaladin, if any of you read Stormlight, or any of the other suffering in silence type heroes that are in all the stories that I love. The underlying smug satisfaction feels really good. This must be better than complaining, I think to myself. But whenever my partner complains, I see it doing something for him, scratching some deep itch. I kind of call myself complaint curious. On one of my recent pain days, he suggested that I just try complaining, full-scale selfish, why me, no holds barred, complaining. So we tried it. It was comfortable, awkward, but it was uncomfortable and awkward as the satisfying smugness kind of vanished as I started to talk about how I actually felt. Me, tentatively kind of saying, this sucks. And him with the enthusiasm of a color commentator on a sports broadcast going yeah, it does suck. Me leaning in and saying, it just hurts so much and there is nothing I can do. He's like, that is so unfair. Me finally kind of letting go and saying this is really overwhelming and I can't make money and my career is collapsing and I can't think straight and the world is broken and emails are stressful and I just keep giving and giving and giving and staying in pain. And him just being like, Adam, you are basically Jesus. We go on, and this becomes increasingly ridiculous with him riding right alongside me as a consummate wigman. The pain doesn't get any better. It still feels indulgent to suffer out loud. I don't stop hurting. It's weird to make a bid for someone to suffer with me. It slowly dissolves into kind of alternating laughing and crying and a flood of feelings that don't really have good names. And in this instance, complaining served a purpose of its own. It wasn't a bid to solve my pain. It was just sharing what was going on in my inner world. An observation of my discomfort, one might say. There's something about trust and about love lurking here. Would I trust a stranger or a coach or a partner with my suffering or my pain? Where is the line between complaining in a good way and complaining in an insufferable way? The way I cast myself as a savior through my avoidance of complaining comes from this deep-seated sense that somehow it's my job to save the world. I think it's the downside of being a white boy raised in the 90s. There is just constant hero representation. Every superhero team leader was someone who looked like me, and so it's your job to save the world and complaining won't get it done, but suffering in silence until you die just might, sunk in really strong for me. I see this characteristic in a lot of circus athletes. We are all willing to suffer to achieve skills. We're all willing to understand that there's risk and pain and a certain kind of suffering involved. Our relationships with coaches, with casting agents, with producers are so precious. We don't want to be labeled as complainers or boat rockers. The funny thing is, at a grander level, who does not complaining really serve? What structures or institutions or people am I upholding by suffering in silence? Maybe complaining can just be a sign of love and trust. Maybe when someone risks complaining to you, it is a sign of trust. Trust that you won't write them off as complaining in an insufferable way and are instead open to hearing them as complaining in a genuine way. I still have a knee-jerk reaction when people complain, but like any knee-jerk reaction, I don't think it's the whole story.